Coming up on the Tall Mike Wine Podcast.
Yes, another road trip up to Walla Walla, Washington is coming up. Say hello if you see me. I'll be the tall guy with a microphone. So that means I'm really old now.
I'm relatively the same amount older. So when you work 100 hours a week, you learn a lot faster than if you only work 40, which I went from working 100 hours a week to working 35. And
Wow.
like, this is easy. And actually,
Like you're on vacation all of a sudden. I show him my bottle. He shows me his bottle. Just so you know, it's an audio-only podcast. It will never be one of those YouTube podcasts because look at me.
And now, the Tall Mike Wine Podcast.
The cell phones have been silenced. The wine is poured. Are you having some? Excellent. And just like that, the podcast begins. The Tall Mike Wine Podcast. The wine podcast that's not all about wine. The wine podcast like no other. Currently number 12 on the Feed Spot list of the 50 best wine podcasts. Heard in 52 countries on 6 continents. Hello, American Samoa. And in 47 of these United States. From Dover, Arkansas to Loganville, Georgia. From Tuckerton, New Jersey to Atascadero, California. And of course, wherever you may be. Many thanks for tuning in. I'm Mike Stone, your host, and I'd appreciate some help getting my little podcast some love on the Apple Podcast app. How about dropping a 5-star rating and a well-worded review? I'm told these things help out a lot. Would you like your very own set of Tall Mike Wine Podcast coasters to dress up your wine drinking surfaces? Drop me an email, tallmikewine@gmail.com. I'll try to get them in the mail before heading out on vacation. Yes, another road trip up to Walla Walla, Washington is coming up November 16, 17, 18, and 19. I will be out and about, tasting all over Walla Walla. Say hello if you see me. I'll be the tall guy with a microphone. Moving on. Episode 33, coming to you from my home studio in Novato, California, and my guest on the Zoom. She is the founder, owner, and chief wine wizard at Copa Fina Wine Imports, bringing boutique wines into the United States from Argentina, Chile, New Zealand, Spain, Italy, and Uruguay. I met her way back at the beginning, about a dozen years ago. My guest is Shelbi Elkins. Has it really been that long since we met?
So long that I'm actually Shelbi Herring now.
Oh, that's right. I have Shelbi Herring written at the top of the page, and I must have had
old habits die hard.
I went back in time and thought, that's Shelbi.
When we met, much more actually, a handful more than 10 years ago, because you were at the top of my account roll when I started my business, which was 14 years ago.
So that means I'm really old now. And
I'm relatively the same amount older, so I'm pacing with you, Mike.
But when you started, this is something that I thought was fascinating. When you started, in my mind, you were super, super young. And all of a sudden you were starting a business where you were going to Argentina and you were bringing wines in. And that's, that's complicated. Not to mention you're putting yourself on the line for some, big bucks. You've got to now sell this wine. What was the deal? How did you get it all started? How did it start?
Well, I was young. I was 26 when I started. You can do the math, which means I turned 40 this year. So,
happy birthday.
Thank you. I was 26, but my early working career had a lot of density to it. So I felt that I was a 26 with much more working experience, on the job experience than maybe most 26-year-olds. And this was because I worked for a consulting company right out of college, flew all over the country to advise Fortune 100 companies on how to run their business. I learned a lot very fast. And when you work 100 hours a week, you learn a lot faster than if you only work 40. So
wow, 100 hours a week.
Lot. Yes. And I did quite well there. I was the first in my class to be promoted. And I actually was reflecting upon this earlier today because I was talking to one of my team who lives on the East Coast. And she was talking about this experience she had in New York this weekend. And I thought to myself, I haven't been to New York since I started Copa Fina, but I used to go every year. And I'm going down the side here. But the point was that when I left this job, they offered for me to move to New York. And I said, no, thank you. I'm going to stay in the Bay. I love it here. And then I'm going to figure out what my next move is going to be. The long version of this story is that I left consulting when I was 25 and I got a job at Gap Inc. which is based in downtown San Francisco,
Mhm.
just to kind of ground myself, which I went from working 100 hours a week to working 35. And I'm like, this
Wow.
is easy. And
Like you're
actually,
on
I was quite
vacation all of a
bored.
sudden.
It's a lovely company and I met some really wonderful people there, but it wasn't for me. But because my brain was so used to working at that high pace, I was able to take a step back and calibrate. And that was when I really started studying wine, really for fun. I went up to the Culinary Institute in St. Helena. I don't know if you've ever taken any courses up there, food or wine otherwise, but it's a really wonderful education experience. And the wine program they have there is fantastic. And I did intensive classes there. I did my level 1 sommelier, I did my CSW just to learn and to feel that intellectual curiosity. And then after about 8 months at the Gap, I said, okay, wine is this experience that is never changing, unlike sweaters. Every season we sell sweaters. This is just the same thing. I want to work with a more dynamic product. Every bottle of a wine you open, even if it's the exact same wine and the exact same vintage, it's a different experience depending
True.
on
That's very
who
true.
you're with, the food you're tasting. You
Mhm.
know, what is it hot outside? Is it cold? How has the wine been stored? What kind of mood are you in?
Are you on a
Some might
Zoom
say-
call and is it in a coffee cup?
Exactly. Is it in a solo cup in your pool? And even some may say based on the moon cycle.
There are people who do say that, yes.
There are people that do say that. So there it goes. I just found that I felt like wine is a unobtainable, consistent challenge. And I find that extremely motivating and exciting.
So let me pause you for just 1 second with that line of thinking. When you were at the Gap and you started taking the wine courses, why did you do that? Where did that come from?
Well, living in the Bay Area, you have a lot of exposure to the wine industry.
Totally.
And it's easy to go up on the weekend and do wine tastings. It's
Mhm.
fun. It's social.
It's an hour
And-
away from San Francisco to get into wine country.
You know, and when you're in your mid 20s, it's cool to take a bus up there with your friends and go hopping from, as someone who has experience working in the retail side of a winery, I'm sure you're used to these. I don't
see
know,
them
post-COVID.
I see
It
them
still
every
happens.
weekend, the kids from San Francisco, and we host them, and some of them are into it. Some of them, I might just be pushing their buttons into that kind of a thing, I guess.
I mean, you never know. I mean, I found it extremely interesting. And I felt like, going on those trips and having those experiences, tasting at wineries, it's a glimpse into a different world. And everybody's style is different. Everybody's terroir is different.
Mhm.
And you get to see so much in such a small geography. And what I got to thinking about, because obviously I don't work with California wines, where we'll get to is that I'm an importer. So I thought, okay, well, all of this is in our backyard. What are we not seeing? And that's what I started thinking about is how can I go and can I find the things that aren't really being discovered?
So this is when you were still at the Gap. You started the wheels turning in your head.
Yes.
How can I get
wheels
in the
started
wine
turning.
business? What am I
Yep.
good at? What can I bring to the table? And how can I get closer to the wine?
And this is where my consulting days of all the travel back and forth to New York and Chicago and Seattle and beyond, is that I had a lot of miles saved up and a lot of hotel points. I said, okay, I'm going to go on a vacation. Where can I get to for free? And where can I stay for free?
Okay.
And you know where I lined up? Argentina.
That's what I was going to guess, but I already knew the answer.
Yeah. This is because you know me for 14 years. I went to Argentina, and in the meantime, and I didn't go to Argentina thinking about wine. I just went to Argentina to have a vacation.
Okay,
But in the
that's what I
meantime-
was going to ask you. Was it did you think about it and then go there, or did you just say I'm going to go to Argentina because I know they have wine there, right? You knew that.
Yes, I knew that, but I knew that they had Malbec. This was before Malbec was really a trend.
That's down the page on my notes here. I want to get to the thing that might have shifted down there that went from being, we know Argentina has wine, to we only think of Malbec when we think of Argentina. I want to know how that happened, but I want to get into that a little later.
So this was before that. This was when people were saying, what is Malbec?
Mm-hmm.
So I went down there just for vacation. But in the meantime, I've been working on this wine education. Of course, while you're down there, you want to go and learn about wines. And I had just this fantastic experience tasting incredible wines at great prices and great food and great culture and great hospitality. And it felt so undiscovered.
Mm-hmm.
the ease of the tourism wasn't there. I think it's come a long way, and it's some place that I highly recommend people try to get to. It's a bitch to get down there, but once you get down there, it's really worth it.
Yeah,
I can say that, right?
It's
I
a
can
long
say
way.
bitch.
You can say bitch. You can drop an F-bomb if you want to. Come on.
All right. Okay.
So a lot of people use this phraseology when they talk about different regions that are not Sonoma and Napa here in California. Like say they go up to Amador County and they say, oh, it's kind of like Napa Valley was in the 30 years ago. So if you were to characterize your experience in Mendoza 15 years ago, how would you characterize that to what's going on now in California or in the past in California?
Well, I was not in Napa 30 years ago. I've only been going to the wine country for 15 years. So I can't really say.
Okay.
I don't think so. I don't think it's not what I imagined Napa was like 30 years ago.
Okay.
Even, Mendoza today has changed quite a bit in terms of tourism. It's a lot easier to move around. There's a lot more things that you can do. But Mike, you're going to have to you are extremely more well-versed on Napa and Sonoma and the wineries up there than I am. It's been years since I've been up to the valley. I live in San Diego now. And it's just not part of my business. And so when I go, when I have time to spend leisurely time, actually, I opt to go to not wine growing regions for a change of pace. It's lovely, but it always feels like work. I know that you're going to go up on vacation to Washington and it's still enjoyable, but it's still work.
Well, not really.
Is it hard to turn it off for you?
No, it's not hard at all. I'm going up to Washington State, which is where I initially cut my teeth on wine. And so a lot of those wineries were either little babies or didn't exist when I was up there in the 1990s. And I, at that time, was not in restaurants. I was not in wine. I was a civilian also. And I sort of accidentally fell into the restaurant business. And there's been such a great development in Walla Walla. There's sort of this unique thing where you've got this tiny little town that's not close to a major metropolitan area, which is weird for a major wine region, at least in this country, because, everything here is kind of close to San Francisco. But Walla Walla is far from Spokane, farther from Seattle and Portland. So it's unique because it's kind of like this isolated little town. And if you really want to be there for wine, so does everybody else. And the people there's not a lot of distractions. You go there and it's really a wine town. It's wild.
That sounds pretty cool. I'd like to experience that sometime. There's a lot of wine regions in the US I haven't been to. And I, at some point in time, would like to put it on the list. But maybe it's my experience as an importer is that whenever I go to wineries, a lot of it's with the intention of vetting them. So I sometimes can't turn my brain off. I'm looking at this and saying, how are those pallets stacked? And this doesn't look temperature controlled. And, is there a weird smell in here? I'm programmed almost to look for flaws. So it becomes, not enjoyable. I don't know what it would be like to be a food critic. I would imagine that it's sometimes where like every once in a while I can take the enjoyment out of it. And so I like to do that. If I was going to go to Walla Walla, I'm like, okay, this is a vacation and we're going to set it up that way. And I'm going to go to places where I don't know anybody so I can go incognito,
Right. Imagine it'd be worse if you were a dentist. Everybody you met, you'd be looking at their teeth.
Oh, that does not sound like fun.
So let's talk about Argentina and its transition from, in the 90s when I was just kind of checking out wines from the world before I got into wine seriously. There was like, Argentina has wine. Okay, what's this one? This is a Merlot. Okay, they make red wine. Okay, cool. And then flash forward maybe about 10 years and all of a sudden you are importing wine from Argentina and Argentina's on the map and people find it synonymous with the grape Malbec. How did that all happen?
Let me go back a little bit further. Argentina has been producing wine for 400 years.
Okay.
But they've only been seriously exporting wine for about maybe 30 and in small amounts. And still about 2/3 of the wine is consumed domestically. Argentina is the 5th-ish largest producer in the world. So if you look at France, Italy, Spain, usually top 3, always in the top 3. Yes. They change around in order.
Yep.
And then you've got the US and you've got Argentina. I mean, they're kind of always the ones that are in the top 5. But Italy, Spain, and France export the majority of their production. So Argentina it's a very wine-centric culture. And their consumption, it's a big part of life. It's wine at lunch. It's wine every day around the clock. Not around the clock. It's every day. It's part of their life. So exports didn't really happen until I could probably go into a long history about the evolution of the Argentine wine industry. I don't think that maybe this is that interesting for the content of this podcast.
Let's summarize.
Basically, you had a crash, you had an improvement in quality in the 70s, and then you had basically international winemakers getting a little bit more interested, which opened up investment and opened up exports. But still, exports are a small part of what they do. You started to see a couple of big wineries come to the US. And when I went to Argentina, I saw all these other wineries, all these boutique wineries. And I said, when I came back and I started to look for some of these wineries, I couldn't find any small production family wineries from Argentina. And you look around and there's small family wineries from every wine region.
Okay.
So I thought, okay, if small productions, family wineries are successful from every other region in all these big wine producing countries, why can't it work from Argentina? So that was how I started. And this was before Malbec was crazy. I started in 2009, the market crashed, and I had inexpensive, easy to drink wine. That was how I went to market. Hey, you don't really know what this is, but it's a good price. The quality is great. You don't know me. I got a wine bag and I've got 14 wines. I'm 26 and you might think I'm a little bit crazy. What might have been what went through your mind, Mike, when we first met. But you try the wines and you say, hey, this is pretty good. I'm going to give this gal a chance.
I thought you were crazy, but in a good way.
All right. I will take that as a compliment. I hope it still stands.
It does. All right. So then Malbec got its own identity. But it did. Sort of a like, what's working? If it's working, let's really focus on what works. We've got all these wines and the Malbec seems to be a good seller. Let's focus on the Malbec a little more. Or is it also the fact that they drink a lot of their own wine and they eat a hell of a lot of steak? I
think you have a couple of different factors that were happening. First of all, as Malbec was on the rise, do you remember the Shiraz craze?
You mean Australian Shiraz?
I do.
Okay.
Do you remember in the
there was
early
a
2000s,
time,
it was everywhere.
There was a time when it was overproduced or at least overimported or just too much of it on the market because a lot of it was
But before it got to be too much, it was very popular.
Yes.
And I think that Argentina saw the success of Shiraz and said, okay, if people are going to recognize us, we need a flag. What are we going to stand behind?
Okay.
And Malbec had always performed well in Argentina. And I mean performed well in terms of quality. It's a grape. It actually means bad mouth, where it comes from France. It comes from Cahors. And it is a grape that struggles with any precipitation, any moisture. It can be very tough. And historically, it's been used in Bordeaux and the surrounding regions as a blending grape to add color and acidity, not to add flavor. It goes back to the days of Phylexera. Have you talked about Phylexera on this show?
I try not to talk about things that are quite that geeky. I
mean,
all right. Some of the people listening to the show may know what that is, but we haven't really gotten into it too much.
Okay. Well, let's not get too geeky, but just in the late 1800s, there was a flood of immigrants that left Europe, and with them, they brought vines. The Malbec vines made it officially. A French agronomist was hired and found that Malbec did well. And then you had an influx of French immigrants that then knew how to work with the varietal, recognized it, and it did very well. In Mendoza, you have 8 inches of annual rainfall. It is a desert. 98% of it is inhabitable due to lack of water. And so the vineyards are really an oasis thanks to the Andes mountains. Because of the Andes, you have access to water, you can irrigate, and the vines get just what they need to survive. And with that dryness, with that hot temperature, with that shift between day and nighttime temperature that you get from that lovely Andes mountain influence, these wines were able to produce very friendly expressions of Malbec, juicy, well-structured, very soft tannins, and at a fraction of a cost of wine of this quality from other regions around the world. So if you take easy to drink wine, good price point, and Argentina, people know, they've heard of it. They might not know where it is on a map. They might not know anything about it. Malbec and Tango was really then what pushed this forward. And that's what most people know. They speak Spanish, Avita. These are the things that people associate with Argentina. And, you had this very friendly varietal. It was easy to drink. And when people got tired of Shiraz, it was an easy thing to go to. But what I think Argentina did very well is they didn't put all of their money on that horse. Along with Malbec, they can do Cab Franc. Does very well in Mendoza. You get extremely friendly, well-developed expressions of Cab Franc. There's a growing sparkling industry. Chardonnay, high elevation Chardonnay can be very lovely. Yeah. Bonarda is a varietal that actually until the Malbec popularity came, was the most planted grape in Mendoza. So that has had a little bit of a slower pickup, but it's a very friendly, juicy grape. Cabernet, Paul Hobbs thinks Argentine Cabernet is the future.
And he's not nobody.
I've heard him say in many an article. And so while Malbec still leads, I think that there's a lot of quality behind it. Here at Copa Fina, we are really adamant about telling that story. It's also, we try to not just talk about Mendoza. We try to talk about the different regions within it, because there is a lot of diversity viticulturally within the state of Mendoza.
And you're going to be one of the main proselytizers of that whole growth of the knowledge in the market, because this is how it starts. People think, oh, Argentina, there's wine there. And then it's like, oh, Argentina, that's Malbec. And then, eventually, think of how much we know, even the average consumer in this country, about France. There's a bunch of different regions. Oh, there's a bunch of different grapes. And Italy. And eventually, you're going to find more of that dynamic in the knowledge base of the American consumer. And you're one of those people that's going to lead the charge for that.
Well, thank you for that responsibility. But I think that
no pressure.
How it's important. But I think that, within the supply chain, you have a lot of very important levers that have to be pulled to get a message to the consumer. And as I'm an importer and a distributor, and I see my job as needing to be as translucent as possible, because the Copa Fina brand, at the end of the day, to the consumer shouldn't matter. My job is to transition this, whatever is in this bottle, this winery, this story is what matters. And I have to explain that to the buyer, who then has to explain it to the clerk or to the server. And then the server or the person who's working in the wine shop has to explain it to the consumer. So there's a long game of telephone. And my job is to make sure the messaging is as clear and as compelling as possible to get from the winery to the glass. And
I like that. I like that a lot.
Yeah.
Hey, would you hold that bottle up again? Because I want to take a picture of you holding the bottle. Look at that. Oh, there's Shelbi. Hooray. Do you have some of that in your glass? This is the time on the podcast.
Not yet.
When I say to you, Shelbi, what's in your glass?
All right. Well, cheers, Mike. Here we go. Now I have some in my glass.
Okay.
Shelbi, I wanted to grab.
Pouring a white wine into her glass.
Actually, Mike, it's an orange wine.
Oh, well, I can't tell on this Zoom call. Hold it up. Hold the glass up.
It doesn't actually look
it's not
very orange.
No, here, let me get that again. Let me get that picture. This is fun. I have it on my notes. Take pictures.
Okay.
Because I say at the end of the show, follow me on Instagram.
Okay. Well, I hope you filter the pictures like you do. You edit the podcast, because I did not come photo ready for today's interview. So
you look lovely.
You need to filter me,
As always. Tell me about the wine.
I will tell you about the wine. I don't know much about this wine, but I wanted to grab something I didn't know, because I figured we could explore this a little bit together.
Yeah.
But this is a wine that my husband just added to the list at his restaurant, and it was based on the recommendation of the sales rep, doing her job of best of translucency, explain the story about this. It's from Oregon. I realized that it just says Oregon white. It doesn't have a region on it. And I looked it up, and it's actually from 4 different appellations. So this is an amphora, and then they ferment it. This seems like a lot of buzzwords here. A Novum amphora, a cement egg, and an Austrian cask.
Okay.
So it's called Old Love. It's from Ovum wines. It doesn't look very orange, but it is, orange wines should have a little bit of skin contact. Stop me if you guys have talked about this before, but orange wines are wines that are white grapes that are made like red wine. But sometimes you just don't get a lot of color from whatever you're using here. And I don't even know what grapes they're using here.
They're not telling you?
Not on the bottle.
Okay.
It's very evasive.
Okay.
Anyway, I wanted to try this because Brett added it to the menu. It doesn't even say it on the tech sheet.
Maybe you could guess what the grapes are.
All right. You're going to put me to the test here. I like it.
One of those parlor tricks. I'm going to guess what this is.
You get a little bit of citrus, a little bit of lemon rind.
Okay.
It doesn't have a bright freshness, but not in a bad way. It's not quite musty, but it is a little bit evolved, which may be from the skin contact.
And now she's sipping.
Wow. Big banging acid. Lots of acid.
Mouth watering.
Mm-hmm.
Drooling.
Very salty.
Oh, okay.
A lot of citrus. Maybe some clementine, but also almost like a lemon custardy, where there's a lot of richness to the texture.
Like a lemon curd kind of thing?
The label here I'm looking now says blood orange. I think that's pretty spot on. So this wine is a mystery, but it's pretty good.
So it's called Old Love. It's an orange wine. What's the name of the winery again?
The winery is Ovum, Ovum.
I only wish that you had one of my coasters to set your glass on.
I know. Well, I'm missing that. And now I see that this says it is primarily Riesling.
Oh.
Okay. Well, let me see those coasters, Mike. I hear you keep talking about those. All right. Looks very on brand.
I'll mail you some.
I look forward to that.
Let's move on. Thank you for the description of the wine.
You know, sometimes you open a bottle and you don't know what you're going to get. And we opened the bottle and we still didn't know what we got, but it was still good.
But, it's sometimes nice to open the bottle and not already know what it is, because we live in a world where you don't have too many surprises, because you hear a lot about a thing before the thing is placed in front of you. You know how it is? Somebody's like trying to get you interested. So they tell you the story first and they give you all the information first. And then when you taste it, you already have all these preconceived ideas about what you're probably going to taste. So if you thought that was a Riesling, what would you have thought when you first put it in your mouth? This doesn't taste like a Riesling, or this is kind of Riesling-y?
I can see a dry Riesling for sure. There's a lot of dryness here. Riesling, I think, is one of the most intriguing white grapes out there. It can be extremely elevated. I used to say that don't trust a sommelier who doesn't like Riesling.
Right. They're all into it. They're all really into it. And then the average consumer is like, well, that's what we buy grandma at Thanksgiving. They buy her a bottle of dessert wine because grandma likes that with her turkey. Well,
and you know what? If that's what grandma likes, then that's great. This is another thing I love about this industry is there's no wrong answer. Every wine can be good to somebody, and whatever you think is the right answer.
So now your empire has expanded to include more things. Tell me about Fanatic wines and Orangewood wines.
We have been expanding. It's been a new and exciting adventure, both in very different directions. I'll start first with Fanatic. We have never worked with domestic wines. I've always struggled because California is a state that supports a lot of winery friendly laws. And one of those laws is that a winery can sell directly to a restaurant. In a lot of states, that's not allowed. You must go through a distributor.
Okay.
A lot of wineries need a distributor to get to customers.
Right.
But with the small wineries that I work with, a lot of times I just felt like I was an unnecessary block in the chain, which added price and also diluted the story. And I just had a hard time figuring out how to interject myself to add value, as opposed to just fulfillment. At the end of the day, we're storytellers and we're in this for passion. And I had a hard time finding the right way to sell California wines as an importer. Now, there are a lot of companies whose primary job is to sell domestic wines, and their business model is set up that way. But I was never set up that way. And so kind of figuring out how to break into that was a challenge for us. And it's something we've always bumped up again. A lot of our customers would say, we want to buy more wine from you. Do you have domestic wines? So I'm on the stream of trying to figure out how can we have something to say on the domestic side of the portfolio. And then independently, my team is incredible and they have an internal quest for knowledge and for learning, and they wanted to make wine. So we said, okay, why don't we do it? Why don't we start a winery? And there's a member of our team. His name is Tyler Stacy. He had already started working with his own wine brand. And so Tyler said, okay, he's like, I can lead the charge on the winemaking here. And we had a relationship. It's called an AP, where you can lease space from an existing winery. And so we set up an AP in Napa, and we sourced some fruit out of Clarksburg with some relationships that Tyler had. And we do Chenin Blanc, Cab Franc, and we are going to do an orange Pinot Gris this vintage coming out of Clarksburg. Fanatic is, I don't know if you want to, when you take a photo.
Let's get that. Yeah, let's get some Fanatic in here. Cool. I like the little grape clusters riding a motorcycle.
It's cool. Yeah. My husband.
That is going to sell.
Yeah. It's fun, right?
That kind of thing is one of those things people will look at and say, oh, look at that. That's cute.
Also, I like this part of the story in that my husband's cousin is 16. She's an incredible artist. And she was sitting there doodling a picture of my daughter. And I was like, that looks really cool. I'm like, could you do something like with me, but with grapes, with this in mind? And so she did the initial inspiration. And then we worked with a guy based here in San Diego that's helped me with a lot of labels to kind of pull it together. But it's fun, and I like when things come together like that. It was driven by family and from the heart, and not just something that we put up on what is the task rabbit or task whatever, where you outsource these things and people bid and you're just like, okay,
that Task Rabbit, Thumbtack.
Thumbtack, that's the one.
Fiverr.
Like, I haven't heard of that
things.
one, but Thumbtack.
So now you're importing wine, you're making wine.
We are. And so it's something that we're really proud of. Apart from that, we have acquired a distribution company in Arizona. Just last week, I was there for our rollout launch. I am proud to say that we are the only female owned and operated distributorship in the state of Arizona.
That's cool.
It's a start. It shouldn't be the only one,
No.
But, you have to start when you count. One is the first number.
Yeah. Well, the wine business, I mean, going back to before you got into it, was very much a men's club. My friend Janet was on the show last year, and she was in the 1970s. She was selling wine up in Santa Barbara for a distributor. She was working at a winery. She asked if she could go out and sell wine on the streets, and people were shocked that she wanted to do that because that's what the men do. And when she showed up at accounts, they thought she was there with her little pack of samples. They thought she was there to sell cigarettes to them.
I would enjoy having a conversation with her at some point in time.
I will connect you to her.
I would enjoy that very much.
She's still selling wine in San Francisco, and you can hear her on a previous issue of the podcast. But she's always been into acting, and she wrote a film about the wine business back then. It's called Cork, the movie. She's really cool.
Oh, great. I'm going to look that up.
I'll get you guys hooked up. I'm sure you don't like to play favorites, but what's your current can't get enough wine jam?
Well, I am a sparkling girl through and through. That is my go-to category. But I am recently enjoying experiencing some of the white pet nats because it's just a little bit sparkling, and it can be just a little bit lighter, usually a little bit, lower alcohol, easy to drink. I am a mom. I've got 2 young kids. I help my husband with his restaurant. I've got now 2 distributorships and a winery. Sometimes it's nice to have things you don't have to think so hard about. And I've found pet nat category to be just something that's been so different. It's about as opposite of Malbec as you can get. And sometimes sparkling wines can be quite serious, especially when you get into champagne and things like that. I've really enjoyed experiencing some of that. So we have some new ones in the portfolio from Italy that are just really fun.
Can you explain pet nat in like a 30-second soundbite? Because I have a bottle in my fridge that somebody from another winery gave me recently. I've been hearing about it because it is sort of a of the moment hipster thing, pet nat. And I'm still not 100% sure what it is.
So pet nat stands for Pétillant Naturel.
Okay.
It's like a uncontrolled version of sparkling wine, but a little bit more natural. So how typical sparkling wine is made is it goes through the first round of fermentation in the tank. And then in some method, you add something to the wine to begin a secondary fermentation, which then produces the bubbles. In the bottle, usually it happens in the tank for Prosecco. Secondary fermentation, it's induced. Okay. So pet nats are actually bottled before the primary fermentation ends. So there's still a little bit of active yeast in there. So the secondary fermentation happens naturally based on the yeast that are still surviving in there. So it goes through a secondary fermentation, but it's not as intensive as a full sparkling wine. So you get it, it's a little bit frizzante. I've explained this there's a couple of people where I kind of call this the beer of wine.
I was just going to say that whole process sounds like home brewing to me because you put the beer in there and you add a little bit of sugar to make the bubbles happen in the bottle.
So you're not adding anything in the case of pet nat. It's still, because in the process of fermentation, the yeast eat the sugar until the sugar's gone and then the yeast die. If you bottle it before all the yeasts are out of food and essentially die, that fermentation is going to continue. But in the bottle, the CO2, the bubbles get trapped in there. So a pet nat is like a partial way to a sparkling wine. Typically they're lower alcohol, 10.5, 11, and they were just really fun.
Most people are approaching it as it's a wine I don't have to think too much about. It's not snobby. It's for everybody. If you're a hipster.
I think that we can try to transcend it out of the hipster category. Yeah. I think that actually pet nats have taken over what 5 or 8 years ago was rosé.
Right.
Rosé was simple, easy drinking. Right. Don't overthink it. It's for everybody. It's, not this complicated category. And I think that, a lot of rosés have evolved to where you can actually have quite serious rosés made for food, skin contact, more oak aging. There's now all of these styles of rosés, and the category has really evolved to not just be these patio pounders. And I think that pet nats have kind of come in to say, okay, now rosés are a little bit more serious, a little bit more streamlined,
We're the
or
next
mainstream.
thing.
It's the next thing.
Okay, cool. Do you want to know what's in my glass?
I do want to know what's in your glass.
In your honor, Shelby, I have a Malbec in my glass.
Excellent.
But a Malbec from Washington State.
Ooh, on brand.
That's right. This is from a winery called Mark Ryan Winery. It's actually not their main label, Mark Ryan. It's a smaller label they have called Board Track Racer. See the picture of the motorcycle there? You just showed me a picture of a label with a motorcycle on it. This is actually a label they call Board Track Racer, and it's kind of an homage to these tracks they used to build for motorcycle racing back in like the 1920s when motorcycles were kind of a new thing. And they used to build these wooden tracks for them, these wooden ovals, and they called them motorcycles Board Track Racers. And so there's a picture of the motorcycle there. Isn't that
I like
cool?
that. I like that it also feels like a hand sketch.
Yeah, they do a lot of things right there at Mark Ryan's. This is the 2019 Malbec. And as you would imagine with a young Malbec, it is very bright and very fruit forward, but there's some really nice depth to it. Lots of blue and black fruit. Not too much in the way of tannins.
I thought for a second that you were going to tell me that you tracked down a bottle of Siete Fincas.
I wish that I could. My good friend Edgardo Stoloka, I still follow him on Instagram and still comment on his pictures occasionally, and he'll write a comment back to me.
You should have him on the podcast the next time he's in the U.S.
Oh, that's an amazing idea. Can you make that happen?
Absolutely. I think he's going to be here in the spring.
Okay. And the guy we're talking about is the guy who owns a winery down there, and he was one of your first, wasn't he?
He was, and I think he was one of the first ones you actually bought from me.
And then he came here, and he had dinner in my restaurant that night, and he gave me a hat, which then I wore a lot when I started working at the winery where I work now. Like the first summer, I wore that hat almost every single day. Cover up my bald head in the sunshine.
You got to protect that.
And then the hat wore out, and now I have a new hat. But it's not a winery hat though. Maybe you could have him send me a new hat. That'd be awesome.
I will put that on the list of things for him to bring in May.
Quickly, I want to go back a little bit further. We talked about you and your corporate life. I want to go back and figure out if there were seeds planted for you to end up in the wine business when you were younger. Where did you grow up, Shelby?
I was born in Dallas.
Okay.
Until high school. And then I moved to San Diego, which is where I live now.
Sure. You consider that to be kind of your hometown then? I
do. A big part of my heart is still in the Bay. I miss it a lot. I don't think seeds of the wine industry were planted in me per se. I think that really came with me living in San Francisco. Mm-hmm. But I do think the seeds of entrepreneurship were. My dad, has been an entrepreneur since he was 16, ran companies, and has been a great advisor to me over the years. When I came out of college, I purposefully chose a different path. I went working for big companies, and then Gap is, pretty big company working in a strategy group there, because I found it fascinating to see how these large, massive corporations ran from the inside out. And I had a really interesting vantage point to see the insides of these. And then what I learned ultimately is that I wanted to come back to my roots and pave my own way. My upbringing had a big part in that. The spirit of entrepreneurship, I think, is definitely something that runs strong in my family.
Well, you're making it happen. I hope your dad's proud of you.
I know he is.
Have you been on many podcasts?
Mike, I have not been on a lot of podcasts. This is my second experience. I was interviewed on the history of wine for Som TV about Argentina, which was a very lovely experience. And I'm always looking for podcast recommendations to expand my knowledge as well. So I'm going to ask you to send me some recommendations of things I should be listening to so I can gain my podcast exposure. What's
really interesting is I don't listen to a lot of wine podcasts. And one of the reasons I started my wine podcast was because the ones I was first exposed to were like listening to people drone on and on and on about things that I, even as a guy who's in the wine industry and loves wine, it's my main passion in life. I think about how when my friends and I go out to dinner, I have a good friend, Brian, and he and I about once a month get together, and we each bring probably, whatever the best bottle of wine in our wine rack is to dinner. We have dinner. We have this lovely night. I show him my bottle. He shows me his bottle. But then we don't really talk about the wine much until like halfway through dinner. We're like, Oh, that's really good. And I'll ask him a couple of questions about his wine, and then he'll ask me a couple of questions about wine and my wine, and then we'll go on talking about each other. And it's a great conversation, and I find it entertaining. And I think that that's kind of what I'm trying to do here. I don't really have wine podcasts that I listen to.
Yeah. I would like to say that I'm very well rounded and I listen to podcasts all the time and I'm super informed, but my days are so dense and I'm talking or listening to people all day long that sometimes I just want to listen to music the few minutes that I get driving to and from pickup for my kids.
I hear you.
I wish I had the leisure of that. And when I'm on vacation, I'm more of an audiobooks kind of girl. I like to get lost in a world somewhere, but I like to devote the time.
Podcasts are the new pet nat of audio listening. Well, I'm still new to it. The guest that I had on last time, I said, how do you like being on a podcast? Because she'd never been on one. And she said, well, so far, I think it's okay. And she said, have you been a guest on many podcasts? And I said, I stopped waiting for people to ask me to be on their podcast. So I just started my own.
You do a great job, Mike.
Thank you so much.
I have enjoyed listening to your episodes.
All right. I'm going to do the closing credits now. Are you ready?
I am.
The Tall Mike Wine Podcast was conceived and is written, edited, produced, and maintained by yours truly. Recorded on a program called Audacity. For your own set of official coasters, email me at tallmikewine@gmail. Remember that thing I keep asking you to do, the ratings, the reviews? Have you done it? Come on. It helps a lot. Follow all the action and pictures via my Instagram. That's just Tall Mike Wine. Use my hashtag #SexyBottleShot to show off wines you're drinking, and I'll follow you. Shelbi, thanks for hanging out. This has been episode 33. I have been and will continue to be Tall Mike Wine, a.k.a. Mike Stone. Thanks for listening. Keep sniffing, keep swirling, keep sipping. Cheers.